Welcome to the Tax Alpha Solutions Podcast, hosted by Matt Chansey. Matt is a tax consultant, author, and certified financial planner with almost 2 decades helping his clients grow their net worth. On the show, Matt brings together an array of specialists to share with you their experience and success along with strategies of the 1%. Matt Chansey is with Coastal One, member FINRA SIPC. And now, here's your host, Matt Chansey.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Matt Chansey, and we're here today on the Tax Alpha podcast. And today we have a special guest. It's Terry Dunken. Terry is a serial entrepreneur with more than 40 years of business ownership and management experience. Beginning with the launch of his Nintendo distributorship in 1981, the year that Donkey Kong forever changed the world, the sale of that business to pursue his law degree and CPA verification, Terry then pivoted to become a leading business succession and family legacy planning advisor in the U.S. In 2011, Terry launched a litigation fund and has grown a leading Mass Tort law firm. He is the founding member of the Dunken Law Firm and is founder and CEO of the Mass Tort Institute. Well, Terry, pleasure to meet you, and thanks for being on today.
Thanks, Matt. Really happy to be with you.
Absolutely. So I love how you referenced all the way back in the Nintendo, like the Donkey Kong, because clearly, if you might not remember when all that started, but there's nobody forgetting Donkey Kong.
Nobody would forget that. You know, it was an interesting ride because I know we're going to focus today on businesses and scaling and growth. I started that business in June of 1981. Nobody had ever even heard of Nintendo. Nintendo at that time was the largest playing card manufacturer in Japan. But they had made the decision they wanted to come into the video game industry. Make a long story very short, I had actually I decided I wanted to potentially get into the video game distribution business. I actually had been in the valve business. I was the national sales manager for a valve company. So I understood industrial distribution and distribution pretty well. And anyway, I interviewed several companies, met 2 gentlemen who actually had the national franchise rights for Nintendo for the entire US. Those guys, by the way, each made a couple of $100 million based on those distribution rights. In any event, met them at a conference in New Orleans. We got along real well, and they said, go back to Houston and put $100,000 in the bank and start the business, and we'll give you the exclusive territory. So I did. And that was June of 81. The first game came out. It was called Radar Scope. Nobody's ever heard of Radar Scope, and you never will. We bought like 20 units, and I think 5 of them are still collecting dust somewhere. We couldn't sell them. And then in August, Donkey Kong came out. And for the next 5 months, we sold about something like 500 units. And anyway, in 1982, which was my first year and a half in business, first full year of business, we did 9.8 million in revenue, made 2 million pre-tax. Wrote a check to Uncle Sam for $1 million. So that was a lot of money in those days. And, it was an unbelievable ride. But frankly, I was more of a CFO than I was a business owner, because to take $100,000 of capital, then got a $250,000 line of credit at the bank and parlay that into $10 million of revenue. And Nintendo did not give terms. You had to wire the money to their bank account before they would put the game on a freighter in Yokohama, Japan, and send them to Seattle. Then you had to get them off the boat onto a truck and truck them across the country. So, and dude, we didn't have computers then. So we're tracking all this by hand, and we're keeping, track of orders and money coming in and collecting money from people. So it was a crazy time. I mean, again, 10 million of revenue for a small business back then was a lot of money. So, we struck pay dirt. 1983, the, bottom fell out of that industry. I knew it was going to, and I actually had diversified into the movie rental business. We actually had 20% market share in Houston at the time. And this is pre-Blockbuster, pre all of that. But I hated the retail business. And I also realized you were going to have to go really big or go home. I mean, it was going to take millions of capital and go to build a national footprint. And so I sold those businesses, and then I went to law school, decided I need to learn a little more. So I went to law school and became a CPA along the way. I like numbers more than I do legalese. And, so that was kind of my journey. And then coming out of that, I went to work for a CPA firm. At the time, you had to practice as an accountant for a year before you'd get your CPA certification. So that was actually 1986, which was the year the current tax code we still work off of was introduced, so here we are 36 years later working off the same kludgy tax code, Tax Reform Act of 86. But when I was finishing up law school, I actually took like 33 hours of tax courses, which is more than what you need usually to get an LLM in tax. So, I was up to speed on the Tax Reform Act when it came out. And anyway, I got hooked up. Nobody in the CPA firm wanted to deal with estate planning, and we had some elderly clients. So I kind of took that on, and I really enjoyed that. And so when I came out of a law school, I got paired up with a guy who came out of the insurance industry, and we got a consulting contract with Prudential Insurance Company to scale in the national estate planning practice. And now every insurance company does that, but we were the predecessor to the advanced estate planning groups that you now see in all the insurance companies around the country. So we were traveling all over the country, working with Prudential's highest net worth, most affluent clients, coming out of the real estate department, coming out of Proof Financial and Proof Securities. And it was a lot of fun. I worked with members of many people who are on the Forbes 400 list today, as well as some that were back then. So it was a fun ride. And I did that for 20 years, really enjoyed it. But then, I get to be a little older, and then 9/11 comes along and TSA, and I was like, got tired of being on the airplanes. 20 years was long enough. And so I pivoted and, had invested with some clients along the way and had fun with some of that. But I just decided it was time for a third career. So, got into what we call the Mass Tort arena, which is we'll talk about as we go through the conversation today. But that's kind of the arc of what my life has been as it relates to business. But so I've always been a serial entrepreneur, always loved seeing what people are doing, love reading books and listening to other people's wisdom. And not that I have much to offer, but whatever I can share, I'm happy to do today.
Well, constantly improving and self-educating and looking for the new opportunity. I think those are great characteristics of business owners, self-educated, self-motivated, constantly want to be learning and willing to take on an acceptable level of risk, right? Because there is no risk-free transaction out there, so
there's not. There's always black swans.
Always black swans. That's what I tell people. They say, what's the commonality with a bunch of the clients that you work with? I say, well, they all have some element of a risk-based appetite, right? It's not that their education's the same, their age is the same, their background or anything, but they all understand that it's not about shooting for zero risk. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And if I can make that calculated risk make sense, then maybe there's an opportunity underneath that, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The one thing, I guess the one common thing about what I've tried to do in my businesses, there's a lot of intermediate stages and ways you could go in your business career. But one of the things I decided to do is I always liked finding opportunities where you could leverage a smaller amount of capital or moderate amount of capital and really turn it into really compelling opportunity, as opposed to like, real estate or building office buildings or doing, other types of developments or even, manufacturing companies that just have huge, capital-based structures that they have to have in order to go build the widgets and all of that. So, when times are booming, when you're in, say the manufacturing sector, you can crush it. But boy, when things slow down, you can't get rid of those plants and those hard assets are, hard to get off the balance sheet. So I've always tried to be a lot more nimble and lean in terms of what we do and the way we go about scaling our business. To your point, one of my, I don't know how many people really have read the book, The Blue Ocean, but, a couple of professors wrote it. It's actually pretty intense business if you read the whole thing, but the takeaway is that, we're all, looking for those opportunities where there's really nobody else, fishing that ocean and where you got, tremendous opportunity. We're actually working on one of those right now in our industry, in that we're working with a program that's helping veterans. The VA doesn't really acknowledge this program very effectively. And so we're out communicating it to vets and helping them get some benefits that they're entitled to that they don't particularly know about. So, so to your point, we're always trying to learn and grow and, learn from other people's successes and failures, both. But, business is, always going somewhere different and new. I mean, it's never, one thing we can all count on is it's never going to be the same tomorrow that it was today or yesterday. I mean, you've always got to innovate and create and look to the future.
Very true. Very true. I think we try to mimic other people's successes, but it's hard to, because we don't learn. We learn through failures. We learn through the trial and error, the iterative process. So we have to personally experience a lot of those failures to get to the successes, but we see other people's successes and go, hey, maybe that's a target worthy of shooting at, right? Maybe that's a goal worth shooting at. You said a couple of interesting things. I made some notes. So number one, you like to look for outsized returns opportunities. And I agree with you, right? And every business has a barrier to entry, and some of it's capital, right? And others of it is IP, intellectual property, right? Because I imagine what you did later, even though it wasn't as capital intensive as starting a manufacturing company or a big real estate program, if you didn't know what you knew and have the intellectual bandwidth to process it, then with or without capital, it doesn't create the outsized return opportunity you're looking for.
No, that's exactly right. And, from my perspective, as we all know, and, over the last 20 years, this has become, more and more prevalent. People pay attention to it, but, it's the human capital element. One of the things that I think is really, really important. One of the things I think you've got to make the decision is, especially in today's society, more than yesterday or 20 years ago. I mean, there's a time in our society where people were grateful to show up and get a paycheck and you put their 9 to 5 in or 8 to 5. And, frankly, those days are not nearly as prevalent. What drives the younger generations is different than what drove my generation and what drove your generation. And so, you've got to make sure that your enterprise, first of all, I think has a compelling vision, something that people would want to buy into and spend their time and effort doing, especially the millennials. They really, really want to feel like they're engaged in something that's going to make a difference. And like I said, 20 years ago, people just were happy to have a job and get a paycheck and go home and be with their family, do that sort of thing. But now everybody, of the younger generation, I mean, they want to make their mark, which is awesome. I mean, I think that's great. But it also then is incumbent upon a business owner to make sure that they've really got a vision and leadership and the follow through that's consistent with whatever your messaging is, because you'll get called out real quickly if what you have on the board isn't really the way you're acting. So if being consistent in a leadership platform, I think, is more important today than ever.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's the human capital part has gotten really complicated because not everybody is driven by money or success. Everybody has a different driver. On that topic, I read a book recently in the past few months called Drive. And, it just kind of talks about, once people, I guess if you kind of look at it from the Maslow's hierarchy standpoint and say, and everybody's different, but once you take care of those fundamental needs, it frees up people to lean into their creativity and the other things that make them great. But you have to cover those basic needs in life for them. And it's not necessarily making an unlimited amount of money. It's like, hey, I need money to do what I need to do for my family. But once that's covered, I need to do these other things that I enjoy, that I'm interested in. And then that's what brings out the best human capital, the best employee version of myself, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, to your point, one of the things we try to do in our enterprise is, give people certainly, all the tools and information they need to be successful, but also, we like to have a communicative loop so that we're getting feedback from them about what's working. What do they see from our clients that they need that maybe we're not performing as well as we would want to be. And so, because look, the best indicator is what your clients are saying about you and your firm and your people. And, and if you don't give certainly you have to put guardrails around employees, but you've got to give them enough latitude and freedom where they can, engage with your clients and make sure that, you're being successful in meeting the needs of whatever industry you're in and whatever you're trying to do to serve your clients.
Sure. Well, let's pivot. Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing today. Now that we realize you're in the third act, and that doesn't mean maybe it's a football game and there's a fourth quarter. I don't know. And right now we're in the third.
We'll see, right?
We'll see what comes next. But right now you've kind of pivoted into the mass tort space. So let's talk about, I guess, number one, why did the mass tort space feel like an outsized return opportunity? Because you've already told us that's how you pick things. So how'd you get there?
So in 2009, have a friend in Southern California that was investing some money in what's called litigation funding. And he invested some money with a law firm down Southern Cal that was actually dealing in some of the early PG&E fires. And anyway, we invested some capital there and made some nice returns on it. And as I got looking at that industry, I really liked the investment opportunity. But what I didn't like is when you put money behind individual lawsuits, it's very binary. They're either going to win or lose. And so you're either going to make a outsized return or you're going to, get zero. And so I was interested in the space, but I thought, the better model would be to go get a much more diversified portfolio. And as I started looking into the space, have a friend here who has a friend who's in the Mass Tort world. And I went and met with him actually in 2011. And spent some time, and we thought there was an opportunity to go put a fund together and put money out into this space on a diversified portfolio basis. And so anyway, I started out in the funding arena for about 4 years, I guess, and then in 2015 decided to pivot a little bit in this industry and go ahead and put my law license out and actually be the lawyer rather than advancing money to the law firms. So over the last 7 years, we've represented over 15,000 clients and from all over the country. And, we're the bad guys when you watch TV and you see if you've been injured by, Roundup, 3M combat earplugs, all those sort of things. That's who we are. If you've never heard of this space before, you now know who we are. So, so we aggregate a lot of clients in the torts that we think have good opportunities. And to your question about the opportunity, you can go in early in a tort, and if it doesn't work out well, I won't get off into the legalities of why it would or wouldn't, but if it doesn't work out well, you could have a binary event. But if you're in numbers of different torts, it's just kind of getting, a risk allocation model, because the good thing is if you're in torts early and have a good marketing team doing well for you, you can make a 20x return on your marketing dollars, which is, obviously very, very substantive. So it's a fascinating industry. There's a little bit of a barrier to entry, because first of all, you obviously, if you're going to work directly with clients, you got to have, a law license, license to practice in a given jurisdiction. And then also, frankly, it takes a fair amount of capital because these cases monetize anywhere over a 3 to 8 year horizon. So this isn't like a personal injury case where a lawyer gets a case and sometime in the next 6 months to 2 years, they will either settle it or take it to trial. These are run through what's called a multi-district litigation process, which is overseen by the federal judicial system. And so it takes, and some of these torts, for instance, like the 3M combat earplug torts, by the way, 3M's subsidiary just filed bankruptcy yesterday. I don't know if people saw that in the news, but it's around it's around these 3M earplug cases. But anyway, there's 230,000 cases filed in that MDL. So some of these litigations that we get involved in are massive. And again, it takes a long time to have that play out through the system. So, there's no easy answers in this industry, which is, one of the reasons I really like it. I mean, if it was cut and dry, if I wanted, I'm not saying this is a simple business, but if I wanted a simple business where I knew I could go serve my clients, I'd probably today, truthfully, I'd probably go, buy a company that's in the trades like plumbing or electrical, whatever, and make sure I have a great team who's going and delivering services to clients, because there's always going to be a need for that. I mean, we're one of those outlier businesses that's always trying to see where society's been harmed and is there something we can do to go correct that. I mean, the people that I run around with in this industry are some of the best lawyers on the planet. I mean, they're the guys that go fight these opioid lawsuits. They go, win these Roundup trials. And so it's really, if you had told me 40 years ago I'd be a plaintiff's lawyer, I would have told you you're crazy. But frankly, the corporate world's changed over the last 30 or 40 years. When I was a young man, the pharmaceutical companies and Johnson & Johnson and different companies, frankly, they were really looked upon as, providing great products for our country and, for our consumers. And they're so busy trying to get things to market and make the money that even things that are very harmful to society, they're willing to continue to sell it. I mean, Roundup being a perfect example of that. I mean, they contend it doesn't cause, that it's not carcinogenic, it doesn't cause cancer, but there are a lot of people who have had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that have used Roundup. And so it's hard to believe there's not a causal effect there. So, it's a fascinating industry. There's a lot of hardworking people in it. It's the best analogy I could give for the mass tort world would be it's very similar to making the way they make a movie, because making a movie, all these experts in there giving drafts and crates come together. I mean, you've got the gaffers, the grip guys, on and on and on. And you've got all these people that come together and build a movie. And it's very similar in the mass tort world, because frankly, no one law firm alone probably could take on, Johnson & Johnson or Bayer or 3M, whatever. So there's a collaborative of probably less than 1,000 law firms in this space, some as small as one lawyer, some with 100 lawyers. But in the legal world, that's not a big law firm. You've got Denton's and some of the firms that are 1,000 plus lawyers. And cumulative, we've probably got 10,000 lawyers in the plaintiff's bar in our industry. So it's a pretty small community. We all tend to know one another and try to collaborate. So, we're friendly enemies. We really aren't enemies, because, we all need to pull together and put together the best case we can to move it forward for our clients.
Sure. Well, 20x return on your marketing spend certainly sounds like outsized return. So then the question becomes, how do your case selection process, how do you determine what torts that are worth putting your marketing dollars behind? Is there a process for that?
Certainly, yeah. So you'll get, some scientific experts to, frankly, look at the underlying medical situation and determine if they think, in fact, there's a direct causal effect from a pharmaceutical. If it's a medical device, it's a lot easier in that, if they put a hip in and it turns out that their manufacturing process is making it, like they put a metal on metal in people, and the metal was actually, flaking and coming off inside people's bodies and causing poison. So that's a pretty easy one. Right. Pharmaceutical becomes a lot more, potentially more difficult. And certainly, if it's something centered around cancer or some kind of a debilitating disease, frankly, this, and I'm no expert, but the scientific experts have to determine if they think they could, in fact, prove up the fact that there's a direct linkage between that pharmaceutical drug and then the end game of what's transpired. But, and sometimes it kind of shows itself, because one that's getting ready to come up now, in our industry is similar to the Flint, Michigan water system. Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, they had bad water where a lot of people have gotten cancer, and they had a lot of stillborn infants, and just horrible situation over about 30 years. And actually, Congress is getting ready to potentially pass some legislation to open up the statute of limitations. So the people that lived on that base or near it for over 30 days, over about 3 decades, would be able to bring suit to get some damages. So, so that's the latest one that everybody's looking at, and it's as long as somebody has a cancer that's in the list that the government is providing, saying, here's what we're willing to compensate on, that's a pretty easy one. Then, so that's, first of all, figure out if you think you can, in fact, make a case that is going to be compensable. And then the second piece is, get with the marketing experts and find out, what it's going to cost them to go find you a client who's really going to be able to go cash a check. So, and frankly, that part is really complex and difficult, because you have a lot of people going and chasing the same clientele. And so, frankly, over the last 8 years, we've had some arrows in our backs learning our way along it. In fact, I wrote a book called Mass Tort Secrets for our little niche industry, where I've kind of tried to just share some of the tools of the trade for people that are lawyers that want to get into this industry, if you will, because frankly, vendor selection is really, really critically important. I mean, it is in any industry, but it's especially critical here, because if you're gonna, and I'll give you an example of the kind of capital and what it takes to be in this industry. We invested about $5 million in Transvaginal Mesh cases back in 2014 and 15, and we got about 3,000 compensable client cases. And I went to call, and there's 6 defendants, and I went to call the defendant companies, and they wouldn't take my phone calls. They're like, who's this guy? What's he doing here? And so got a very prominent firm in this industry to serve as settlement counsel for my clients. And so we went and had them negotiate the transactions. But I guess my point is, if you bring $5 million to the table and you can't get a return phone call, what's a guy with $100,000 going to be able to do? So, so there is kind of a barrier to entry. Although, people that are personal injury lawyers will spend several $100,000, acquire a few cases, and they'll give it to a leadership firm, and then they'll do a fee split. So you can start very small, but if you're going to, frankly, go into this industry full time, it really takes a lot of capital and,
Sure.
Cojones.
Sure. Well, what's the no risk it, no biscuit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's biscuits around here as long as they don't get too hard in the meantime.
Understood. Well, what type of marketing program does it take to spend $5 million on to acquire 3,000 clients? I mean, we're talking print and social media and radio. I mean, just you got to be blitzing everything for something like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, some people will go just very strategically. But to your point, I mean, going back over the last, 10 years, really, about 2015, 2016, prior to that, the most efficacy in advertising really was still linear TV. I mean, it was just, broadcast TV and put it out there and get clients. 2015, 16, it really started shifting, to digital, all the online channels and everything. And so to your question, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I would speculate probably 80% is in digital and SEO and SEM, and probably 20% is in traditional TV. There are certain torts that still work pretty well on traditional, like for instance, this Camp Lejeune I just mentioned. That probably will do well late at night with a bunch of vets who are sitting up, can't sleep, and watching the TV. But really, we find the most efficacious opportunities really are the digital. Because, for instance, you could go geofence the VA hospitals and target, whoever's coming in and coming out of those hospitals these days. So that's, we think that would be a much more proficient spend of the capital as opposed to just, throwing it against the TV wall. But when you watch TV, like there are a couple of firms that are in the mesothelioma business, and you'll see, day after day, their meso commercials. There's only 3,000 mesothelioma diagnoses every year, give or take. And so, but each case, frankly, is worth a lot of money. And to advertise and get a meso case on average will cost anywhere from $45,000 to as much as 85, 90 grand, one case.
Wow.
Yeah. But so, combat earplugs, those were running anywhere from $500 at the height, probably got to $1,500 for a case. Roundup cases were, were from $2,000 to the height. They got as expensive as $6,000 to get a client. So if you want to get 1,000 clients, you got to go put, $5 million out. So
yeah, you got to put the money out. I mean, and then you got to, and I hear you getting into that. So capital, on the front, knowing what you're doing, and then waiting for the money to come back to you on the long term. And, too many people today in today's world, like you're talking about how business and job opportunities have all shifted and changes. There's this, instant gratification and this fear of missing out society. Waiting 7 years or 8 years for a claim to settle sounds like an eternity for some people. They're like, I'm not even going to be in the industry or with that firm anymore by the time this settles.
Yeah, and great point. And an even bigger point is think about managing client expectations, because to your point about instant gratifications, okay, here's my paperwork. When am I going to get my check? And so it's like, well, this is going to be a long ride. And so frankly, it takes a great team communicating with them, keeping them informed of where we are and what's going on in the process. And so, but over a 3, 4, 5, 6 year horizon, people get tired of that. And so it goes back to, if you can't have the right team members who have the empathy and will have the conversation with the clients, whatever, you're going to be in trouble because, frankly, your license is on the line. If somebody doesn't think you're representing them properly, they can go file a grievance with the state bar. So, think about having 10,000 clients to represent, that can keep you up at night.
Yeah.
So managing client expectations, making sure you've got the right team members, that they have all the information and, technology they need. So, so there's an art form. I mean, quite honestly, this is on one hand, it's a real simple business if you pick the right torts. On the other hand, in terms of the operational components of this business, it's one of the most difficult businesses to manage because you've got this long duration, long horizon, and you've got to manage these client expectations all the way down the road.
Sure. How do you go about doing that? Do you do webinars and updates or email out?
We'll send, if there's any update on their individual file, they will get a phone call, or some prefer text or emails, depending on method of communication they prefer. We will do quarterly updates on a given tort that we'll send to all the clients that are under that tort. But if it's anything specific as it relates to their individual case, we'll actually reach out to them directly and give them the updated information.
Reminds me a little bit of that movie Aaron Brockovich.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Well, she's still around. She's a spokesperson for some firms on occasion.
Yeah. Well, that movie made her famous, made her a big deal.
It did. Yeah, yeah, I mean, she really is. She's still alive and kicking and still represents the face of some firms. It works very effectively because, to your point, she's a household name.
Yeah. As you know, she made that role that she played in the movie, for anybody that's ever seen it, certainly showed, the types of things that maybe a big corporation might do to some of its employees in the sake of chasing profits. And, the fact that they don't ultimately want to be held liable for it. And it took somebody like her in that movie to show, the compassion that, you should have for those people in those situations, but the time and the effort and the roadblocks and everything that got put up in between. And, you said something earlier in the conversation, and I think corporations have changed. Back in the day, there was pride in building a product that lasted forever or that helped your customers. And I think today, unfortunately, the way that many companies look at their products is they design them for functional obsolescence. And is it just good enough to solve the problem for a certain period of time to get somebody to have to buy a new one? And that's just unfortunate that we've started to take that mindset to maximize profits instead of maximizing the quality of the customer experience, which is not what we're trying to do today.
Well, and I look, on one hand, this has been a great company, but the one that I look at is Microsoft. I mean, their software never has worked properly. I mean, but they were brilliant. They got people to accept something less than stellar, right? I mean, think about the times and it's better now than it was, but boy, when they came out with some of the Windows versions, you'd sit there and watch it just spin for for hours. So, but I mean, they did a great job of just, iterating and building it on the fly, if you will. So, but you're totally right. I mean, it's like, the speed of business is so fast that I think companies feel compelled. They've got to go protect market share and get out in front of it, whatever. And so, I don't think anybody sits there and purposely necessarily says we're going to go cut all these corners. But I think just the practicalities of business is having people feel they've got to go ahead and launch and get it out there, and look, there's some things in the tort world that allows companies to put things to market in the medical and pharma area that they really haven't done the testing protocols that have to happen. So that's how some drugs get out there that really, frankly, can hurt a lot of people that we didn't necessarily know about. So but it is fascinating. I mean, look, this has been a really challenging chapter of my life, but it's a really fun one because I've really enjoyed, meeting a lot of people, seeing a lot of people making a difference, and it's been fun. I mean, look, our industry was really behind on technology, but people are starting to put a lot more money into the technology side of what we do. And frankly, people in this industry made so much money, they kind of didn't have to worry about it. But I think we're seeing more and more technological advances in terms of the way we go out and prosecute the cases. But one of the things I leave your clients and associates with here that may be listening to this is, the litigation funding world is an alternative investment class, and frankly, Wall Street really likes this industry because our case is monetized no matter whether the stock and bond markets are up, down, sideways, and right now everybody's chasing yields and don't know where we should be, right? I mean, you don't want to be in bonds because interest rates are probably just get ready to go through the roof, and you've got nosebleed on where your equity portfolios are too. And so where do you want to be? And so, the litigation funding world is an alternative investment class that gives, and some of the funds are providing, mid-teen returns. So it's pretty outsized returns relative to what we think. If you adjust for the risk factors, we think that's a pretty good return for people. So
Sure. Yeah, you're starting to see a little bit of lit finance popping up, as opportunities. You didn't used to see it, but I do see it every once in a while now. So yeah, and once again, completely non-correlated to interest rates, stock markets. I mean, You're basically just betting on the fact that a case or a basket full of cases have a more than likely chance to be able to settle over a certain time period, and that the return on that is going to be, the juice will be worth the squeeze on it. So, but
exactly. Yep.
Understood. Well, Terry, we're kind of running up towards the end of our time today, but I appreciate everything you've shared. For the people that are interested here, I don't know if you have an online or a social media presence or whatever, but how would people go about finding you and learning more about what you and your firm do?
Well, one of the best places would be go to masstort.institute.com. And like I said, we've got, if somebody wants to learn more about this space, we do daily updates on where different torts are and everything. And if somebody really wants to read my book, it's an easy read. But if you want to learn more about this space, I've got a book, Mass Tort Secrets, and you can get it on Amazon, or you can get it at our Mass Tort Institute website. But yeah, it's a fun world that we're just this little cottage industry, but we try to make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, good. Somebody's got to hold the corporations accountable when they don't look out for the people.
We're trying, buddy.
We appreciate what you do. Well, Terry, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Everybody, this was Terry Dunken. Terry is a Mass Tort attorney, serial entrepreneur, and basically the guy that created Donkey Kong. I don't know what you heard, but that's what I heard.
I did know the designer. I met him. Interesting.
There you go. The designer of Donkey Kong. So, cool. But thanks again for attending today. This was Matt Chancey on the Tax Alpha podcast. And until we see you again next week, thanks so much for listening in.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Tax Alpha Solutions, brought to you by Matt Chancey. We hope you enjoyed listening to this week's guests and insight. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts.